And, well, he's on hold now, so we're not going to take a break. We're going to go right over and say hello to John Rappoport. John is an investigative reporter for over 30 years. He focuses upon writing about politics and the corporatocracy, alternative health, and medical cartels. And he's written for Spin and Stern and Village Voice and many other organizations. And he's written books. And his website is nomorefakenews.com. Nice to have you with us today.
Nice to be here, Gary. Thank you.
John, one question only for you today. You've written so much and you've done so much. I want to have you back for just single topics where I ask you a question and you do a newsmaker and you roll with it. Here's today's topic. A little context. I was approached one day after leaving WBAI by a very large man. It was the middle of August, and he came over to me. He was bald-headed. He had a convertible car there, and he said, "Are you Gary Null?" I said, "Yes." He said, I have something I want to share with you. And I said, "Okay." He said, can you come to the car?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to your car." And so I said, "Pull around the corner." Well, there was a police station around the corner, so we literally pulled right in front of the police station. Then I felt comfortable getting in his car because he couldn't do anything. And so I sat there, and he told me a story, that was so incredulous that immediately I would have dismissed him as a nut, except he told me things that no one, and I mean no one, knew. He started off by saying, "You don't know who I am, and you'll never see me again. This will be the one and only time we have a conversation." And I interrupted and said, "Why? Why do you want to speak with me?" And he said, "Because I feel guilty. I've been following you for over a year and a half. I'm a part of the Null team." And I said, "What's the Null team?" "A group of individuals who have looked for weaknesses, anything that we can use to scandalize you, to blackmail you. But these guys are serious. And each one of your books and each one of your national appearances is hurting them. And you're the number one person out there. You're as bad to them as Ralph Nader was to other industries. And they're not going to take it. So I just want to let you know that they're going to ratchet it up and it's going to get serious. And they may whack you. They may kill you." I said, "Yeah. So tell me the story." But he told me of situations where I'd met people, contracts I had signed but were canceled last moment, a network television series that was canceled after 4 shows that never went on the air, and all these things that no one knew about because I'd never spoken about any of this to the public. And so then I realized he was telling me the truth. He even mentioned, he said, "Do you remember Jerry Rubin's 50th birthday party?" I said, "Yeah, I wasn't there." He said, "Do you remember there was a woman out on the balcony who just casually said, 'Hi, what's your name? What you here for?' Do you remember her name?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Was it this?" And he told me the name. I said, "Yes." She was one of the plants. And then he went into detail about what she intended to do. Now, fortunately, I had only had dinner with this woman and nothing more. And he said, "Did a guy come to you saying that he worked for the Village Voice and wanted to help the cause and was going to volunteer some time?" I said, "Yes." "Did you ever check the Village Voice or check his address?" I said, "No." "Why don't you do that? He was also a plant. All around you, they put plants." And then he told me something that had happened that no one knew. That someone had tampered with one of my manuscripts at the printer and substituted milligrams for micrograms. And only at the last moment did I catch it, and we stamped all the copies to correct it. But that was so frightening, because how does someone get into a printing plant and go over the blues, and that's the last copy before it's printed. So then he had my full and undivided attention. He went on to tell me about how they operated and why me, because I was the only one who had crossover bestsellers, and I had like 11 straight bestsellers in a row. I was on national television every week, and he said, and they're not going to allow it to continue. So look for ways of destroying your reputation. And he also said, "Do you think WPI doesn't have provocateurs and infiltrators?" I said, "Don't know." He said, "Well," and he went on, I won't say what he said, that remains confidential because I won't give anyone any ideas. But after that, I went back, and sure enough, the guy who was working with us, when we looked, he didn't ever work at the Village Voice, and his home address was non-existent. We had to shred over 1 million documents because we didn't know what misinformation he had planted, but I was told he planted misinformation, so when we wrote an article or a book, my brother, Stephen Howard, there'd be misinformation that we could then be criticized for. That's enough about me.
Wow.
Now you. You were approached by a man who came from inside the AIDS pharmaceutical, I'm assuming pharmaceutical establishment, because there's no other establishment would have the interest, to do something similar. Someone who is going to tell you the truth. And when I asked this man, why are you telling me this? He said, because after 1.5 years of following you and looking into every aspect of your life, going to your hometown and asking friends, Gary, ever do drugs? You ever did blah, blah? Nothing. You know, you were a Boy Scout. You have nothing we can nail you on because we've tried. Now, tell us the story that no one's heard. You're going to let our audience know, because I want this audience to know how down and dirty the people who are pro the HIV equals AIDS hypothesis get, and how they go about discrediting some of the greatest minds in the world, like Peter Duesberg, or the Nobel Prize winner Kary Mullis, or Dr. David Raznick, and others who had the courage to look for the truth and found it. I'm really concerned that the audience knows the truth. The form is yours. Take your time.
Okay, Gary, thank you. That's quite a story. Back in 1987, I was writing my first book called AIDS, Inc., and about 4 or 5 months into the research, I had really no idea where I was going with it. I just had an instinct that there was something there. I came across Peter Duesberg's journal article, March 1, 1987, in Cancer Research, that indicated there was no reason to believe that HIV was the cause of AIDS. Somewhere in the writing of the book, through a friend, I met a man who started to tell me that he had experience with, how can I put this, making certain medical lies into medical truth, that he was a propaganda operative. And he told me a few little stories and so on. And I was very interested, but still didn't quite see the connection. We lost touch, but a few years later he came back into the picture, and he said, okay, you've written a book now, you understand a lot more. He said, I'm retired, I'm not in the game anymore, because it occurred to me at some point that it was just too debilitating to myself, meaning himself, to be in that game of lying. And he wanted to talk to somebody, and he thought I might be the right person if I was willing to be completely off the record. I said, sure, why not? Let's see what happens. He used the pseudonym of Ellis Medavoy. And I said, well, I'm going to have to do everything I can to check you out to see if you are who you say you are. And he said, I understand that. And I spent a lot of time. It was very difficult, but I satisfied myself in the end that this guy was real and that what he was saying was very real. He never did tell me exactly who he was working for, and he refused to do that. But it was fairly obvious from what he was talking about that he had taken on contracts as an independent operator, so to speak, from certain people within the core of the Council on Foreign Relations, a very well-known globalist group that's existed since 1920-21 in New York, headed up by the Rockefeller family, and that also somewhere along the line, big pharma interests were involved. And he said basically this to me: we had to discredit the people who were saying that HIV was not the cause of AIDS. Because, number one, it was extremely damaging to pharmaceutical interests who were producing the drugs to treat HIV. And it was also politically very uncomfortable because there was a whole scenario operating on the basis that HIV did cause AIDS in the third world. I said, what do you mean about the third world? He said, well, look, HIV is a smokescreen for death and destruction in the third world, which has been going on forever, Latin America, Africa, so on. The basic causes of diseases in those areas have been the same forever, and you wrote about it in your book, so you understand that. We're talking about contaminated water supplies, generation to generation hunger and starvation, protein-calorie malnutrition, lack of basic sanitation, overcrowding in cities, the outright theft of agricultural lands that were traditionally used by the people to grow their own food. This is what kills people. The political program of, and he didn't specify, but obviously major corporate and government interests, is to keep that going, death and dying in the third world from the causes that have made it so forever. But we have an ideal opportunity for a smokescreen here to obscure the whole thing and make sure that these problems are never remedied, because the leaders, dictators in the third world, and the outside corporate and government interests want to maintain a very weak, debilitated, confused, dying population because they're easier to control.
But bring it back to Peter Duesberg. That's where I want you just to focus.
What he said was, look, here's where Duesberg doesn't even know the harm that he's causing, because when he says that HIV is not the cause of AIDS, couldn't be the cause of AIDS, is ridiculous as the cause of AIDS, he's absolutely right, and we know that. He said that outright to me, Metaboy. He said, we know that. It's obviously true. And other people are coming to Duesberg's aid, other scientists saying Duesberg is right. We have to discredit him, completely discredit him, because politically we want to float the cover story in the third world that HIV is what's killing everybody there, when obviously it's not killing anybody there, and we want to obscure the real reasons why people are dying. So Duesberg has let loose the Pandora's box and doesn't even know it. Furthermore, he is showing and exposing the intentionally fake science at the National Institutes of Health, Robert Gallo, etc., who have made a bonanza off of this, quote, discovery of HIV, when it's absolutely no science at all. And Duesberg has the greatest reputation among the people who doubt HIV because he was a primary researcher on cancer in America at the National Cancer Institute, had grants, big-time grants, universally respected as a very acute scientist, but now he's gone off the reservation and we have to take him down, meaning we have to discredit him above all people. We have to say that he's crazy. We have to say that he shouldn't be teaching students at UC Berkeley where he is. We have to cut off his grant money. We have to make him a pariah. We have to have other scientists say, we never really thought he was that good to begin with, and he was always kind of weird and out there and crazy. He teaches at Berkeley. I mean, come on. All of the kind of insinuation, propaganda, lies to make Duesberg overnight, mind you, Gary, overnight, from one of the most esteemed mainstream cancer researchers in America, if not the world, into a nut, a crazy person, a person who is motivated by just some sort of desire for revenge, perhaps, against his former colleagues.
Okay, let me tighten this up a bit. So let me see if I've got you right. I went out to film Peter Duesberg for a documentary I was doing on AIDS. He did not deny, nor did any of the others deny, the existence of the HIV virus. What he said was his research showed that it was from intravenous drug use in heterosexuals, and it was from the lifestyle of a subset of the gay community, about 2%, using amyl nitrate and a lot of sexually transmitted diseases, including hepatitis, repeatedly, overuse of antibiotics, etc., and then with hemophiliacs. And he said, and that's all that's continued to have it. And he wrote an article. And because he was, at that time, and had been for the previous 20 years, one of America's top scientists, and certainly the top retrovirologist, he held up a giant book. It must have been 6 inches thick. And he said, Gary, here's all the different studies on retroviruses. And we know them. This is my specialty. And this HIV doesn't do any of the things that this does. And then he went on to publish an article because he was a member of the National Academy of Sciences, he published an article. And initially it was well received. Then something happened. A campaign started. And this was a whisper campaign. It was a quiet campaign. Nobody would debate him. When I went to see him, he had no students. He had the lab. He was a full professor and tenured. He had done nothing wrong. But he said, go down the hall. And down the hall was the dean in all of American institutions in this area was Dr. Stroman, and there was also Dr. Bailey, both. And they both said, Peter's absolutely right. We've reviewed his literature. We've reviewed his information. We have spent hundreds of hours on this. He is right. But his reputation is being quietly destroyed from behind the scenes. Who's doing it and how they're doing it, we don't know. Now, that's what I came back with. So I came back saying, my goodness, here's a man who's being destroyed. Who's behind it? You're telling us then that the man who orchestrated that whole smear campaign to destroy him because he was so popular, he had 240 articles published in peer-reviewed literature, he was a recipient of multiple research grants, he was considered one of the greatest scientists in America. If they could take him out, it would send a message to lesser character, lesser intelligent people. Don't tread where he treaded, you'll sink like he did. Is that the message you're giving us?
Yeah, that's the message. And what Medavoy also told me, and I think your listeners would be interested in this, is, how do you do this? Well, there are many methods of destroying somebody's character, whisper campaign, as you say, but also what Medavoy was able to do was influence medical reporters and other reporters, major reporters from mainstream outlets in America, through cultivating the reliable sources of those reporters. Okay? It's not like you talk directly to a reporter, but you begin to, because you're a propaganda operative, who are these medical reporters always relying on? You see, who are their sources for their stories, especially when it comes to AIDS in this case? Okay, I know who these guys are. And so the campaign begins to cultivate those reliable sources and to move them and influence them and shape them and get them to realize, okay, this is the deal. We're going after Duesberg. He's the enemy. And so when reporters talk to those reliable sources and say, well, what have you got for me? Okay, listen, here's the story. Duesberg is a threat. He is gone off the reservation. He's gone crazy. This work is nothing like his former work. He is completely bogus as a scientist and has no reputation left, and you should feel free to destroy him.
We got it. We know who those people are at the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease and the National Cancer Institute who were the sources but would never debate Duesberg. We asked them. I asked Robert Gallo and Luc Montagnier. They came on my program, and the moment I asked them a serious question, they hung up on me. They didn't want to answer. So we know the truth of who was behind all this, but now you fill in a picture. You tell us, and I trust your 30-year integrity of having been right on all your topics and stories and ahead of the curve, that you met the man who came to you and said, I was working behind the scenes to destroy this guy's reputation, because later, twice, Duisberg was brought under official review by the university, and after a lengthy process, they found he committed no error at all. But it was too late. His reputation had been trashed. I thank you, John, for sharing this with us, and we look forward to another update on another single topic. But you brought us this story, the man behind the destruction of the best minds in America on HIV/AIDS, and your man who was the character assassination hitman. They exist. John Rappoport, and his website, which people can go to, is